Welcome to the module on administering PaaS compute options. In this module, we will explore various compute options available for administering Platform as a Service or PaaS in Azure. We will cover configuring Azure App Service plans, Azure App Services, and Azure Container Instances. By the end of this module, you'll have a comprehensive understanding on how to effectively manage and scale Azure compute resources to meet your organization's needs. Let's get started. Now, as we start our journey into PaaS solutions, one of the first things that we are going to look into more detail is app service plans. This is how we start looking into hosting our application or app solutions in a PaaS service. Now, to do this, let's talk about a few things that we require as part of implementing app service plans. As we've mentioned a few times before in the sessions, that typically when you're looking to create your solutions, you require some basic details. So you'll be asked for some basic details as part of the setup as well. Things like where you're placing this app service plan, and also part of the app service plan, you get to choose what compute do you require as part of your needs. Now, along with this, the compute will help you in terms of determining what performance you require and what features you need as part of that plan. Things like number of virtual machine instances and the size of the machine that you require as part of that. Now, let's have a quick look at some of the plans that we have available for us to look at, to implement in Azure. Before we go and implement them, let's have a quick discussion around some of these plans. Now, as a quick understanding on some of these plans, let's start drawing a line in between this table for a few moments. Now, the reason I'm trying to draw a line is to explain that most of the plans that you see on this side of the screen, they are typically looking at plans that are typically used for dev and test. And if you're looking to create plans in production, you are going on this side of that line. You have loads of different features that are listed on the screen. I'm not going to read every single one of them out. However, you can explore the slides and understand some details. Let's pick some of the important details. For example, I have a free plan. So I can create an app service plan for free and use some of my app services on a free plan. However, there are some limitations with this. This particularly runs for a few minutes in a day for free. So you can't utilize this for a solution that you might require for your environment. Typically, it's roughly an hour in a day. Along with that, it has some other limitations that you can see on the screen. Now, the plans that are created for typically dev and test, including the free ones, they don't allow multiple instances of compute added in the backend, and also they don't offer any auto scaling. As you can see, most of them has no auto scaling options. However, we could see a plan that can offer multiple instances without the auto scale. That would mean that it would require a manual scale at that stage. We could look at plans that are in production and look at options like the premium plans. Now, the premium plans has unlimited number of sites that we can host onto them with some storage space that's given to us as part of the plan. It also caters for a nice feature called deployment slots, which we'll cover a bit later on in this module and discuss what that looks like, along with supporting the auto scale and bringing in up to 30 different machines in the backend on my virtual machine scale sets. Now, again, we also have an isolated plan that you could use if you are looking for higher security and high performance of your resource, which provides you an isolated environment in the backend to run your isolated plans. Now, let's jump into the portal and start creating an app service plan for us. Now we're back in the portal. Let's start typing in app service plans. Now, obviously, if I could spell app with the apps, and we can choose the app service plans from the list, and we can start looking at creating a new app service plan. Now, the basic details, as mentioned before, let's go choose a subscription, drop this into the resource group that we're working on. And this is where we can start choosing an app service plan name. Now, this is again going to be very, very important for us to decide, as this is going to be important for us to start hosting our sites. So it's nice to create a name that will help me understand what apps I'm going to bring in this, or somehow identify what this app service plan is going to be used for. If you're creating multiple of them, obviously if you start creating them as app service plan 1, app service plan 2, it might get a little confusing. So let's call this my client apps without the space, and my client apps. Now obviously you can, in fact, let's change it from client apps to say Contoso apps. Now, one important thing at this stage would be for me to understand if this plan is going to be using a particular operating system in the back for me to host my applications. Now, if my apps or app services or websites that I'm going to be working on and hosting on this plan, if they cater a particular operating system, then I need to make sure that plan supports that. For example, if I choose Linux now, later I choose a language that is only supported by Windows, I won't be able to host that app or app service into this plan. I might need to create a new plan for that particular solution. So for now, let's leave it as a Linux and carry on with it. And let's choose a region that we've been working on within this course. So let's try in UK South. Now, as I go further down looking at the pricing tier, as I showed you very briefly earlier on, we can go and explore different pricing plans from in here. Again, here you'll see a list of different plans that are available to us for use. We have the most popular ones listed on the top. However, we can skip them and go down into some more options. We have a free option, like I mentioned, typically 60 minutes a day. Hopefully you're not going to put your production workload in the free plan, because it will stop working after 60 minutes. And again, there are certain other limitations for it. Now, again, just to highlight, these plans already speak or already demonstrate on the kind of resources that are added into this plan for your performance. You can choose different virtual CPUs, memory, and other options that you might need as part of this plan, such as scaling to multiple instances running in the back end. Now, for this particular part of the demo, what I am going to do is pick one of the premium solutions for us to work with, and we'll go with a premium solution that has one virtual CPU core available for me to work and 4 GB RAM, just to make a start on this plan. Let's say select and move on. Now, further on, I have options to place this app service plan to make it zone redundant. If I need or I needed higher availability, I could go into choosing that. For now, for this demo, we'll leave that disabled for this moment. Now, that's all I need to do in terms of creating my app service plan, and we can hit create at this stage. It will validate all the options I've chosen, and if I'm happy with this, I can simply review and create my app service plan. Now my app service plan is ready. Let's go into the resource and have a look at it. Now currently, if I check the details, I am on an app service plan. This is a Linux-based plan, so it's important for me to remember that when I'm creating different things. Also, I can see under Overview tab some of the options that I have chosen. Currently, I'm looking at a pricing plan on P0v3, and I have one instance of that running in my environment, which is Linux-based. Now, some more details that we can look into as part of this plan is to understand, apologies, jumping back on from the slides to the portal. So some more details that we can look into as part of this plan is going down, looking at some options that I get as part of my plan. Now, one of the first things that I want to talk about is scaling options. We spoke about scales for my IaaS solutions. So looking at a virtual machine, I could scale the virtual machine up, add some more compute to it. I could then also do, apart from vertical scaling, adding and removing resources, we could scale out and scale back in, which was horizontal scaling. We have similar options available for me to look at here. So scaling up or scaling down option would be in here, looking at scaling the app service plan. Now, I initially started off with Premium V3. Again, that was with one CPU or virtual CPU in the backend and 4 gig of RAM. Now, if that's not enough for me, I can always switch it to another plan that caters for my needs. And this is something that I can do at any time in the lifespan of my app service plan. One thing that's very, very interesting to understand, because this is a PaaS offering, unlike my virtual machine and IaaS solutions, there is no downtime if I was to change the app service plan. As soon as I change the compute and scale it up or scale it down, that impact happens immediately. However, it does not impact my service that's hosted inside of this app service plan. So I can click on select, and that happens immediately without bringing me any downtime at all. And that's because it's a PaaS solution. Now I can look at solutions to create a scaling out, or looking at a horizontal scale in there to scale out, scale back in. Currently, I've only chosen one instance for it to run as part of my service. Now, if there was a need that I know that my app is going to be super popular, I hope, and it's going to be, again, getting hammered by clients. I've got thousands or millions of users logging into it to purchase or buy things or explore things. And I know that could get really busy, and one instance might not do it for me. I could look into maintaining this manually in the backend and go and increase the number of instances in here. Or I could simply look at changing that to an automatic version. Now, current count is 1. My plan caters for up to 30 counts. I can choose this to change at any point. If I'm manually monitoring this and I see things are busy, I can come back into my plan and increase it to 2, 3, or up to 30, any number. However, I can choose this to be automatically done at based on certain rules. Something very similar to virtual machine skill sets that we were looking at in the previous module. Now, if I do the automatic option, then it will automatically handle that for me. However, I can change that to suggest, let's change this to be on a rule-based, a rule that we can come up with, and decide some of that as part of the setup. Okay, cool. Let's have a quick look at some of these details. As we go into the auto scaling settings, I can choose a manual scale here, or I can define a custom auto scaling rule. I can come down here to define how I want the scale to work. Do I want to choose a mode that goes looking into specific instant count, or based on a particular metric? Now, this is exactly what we were seeing in virtual machine skill sets on defining metrics and choosing our auto scale. In this case, I'm not managing the backend virtual machines or the virtual machine skill set. I'm defining on how it should do it, and the backend PaaS solution manages that for me. In this case, if I look at the settings currently that I have, it's got minimum 1, maximum 1, and default 1. So nothing changing there as such. However, we can go and say add a rule, and this is where we can start changing things. Now, let me come back to the rule. Let's go change the maximum, let's say to 20, not 200, but 20. Default stay on 1, minimum at any time should be 1. So it should always start with 1, keep on minimum 1, either it scales out or scales back in. I should have at least one instance running. So let's go looking into the rules. Now, if I was to define some of these details, I could look at the current setting that is going by the CPU percentage. I can change this metric to be at any other thing, depending on what my need is. If I'm looking at a solution that's based on networking, or particularly a protocol or a particular data type in or out, I can change some of that. However, let's leave that as it is and use the CPU percentage to work with this. If I scroll further down, I can see, looking at some more details to suggest, hey, if my CPU usage is greater than 70%, as it stands currently on the system, I can request for another resource to start. Now, in this case, it says the duration for 10 minutes, is evaluating that for 10 minutes. And if it stays 70% or more, or greater than 70%, then in that case, it's asking to create a new instance for me. Now, that is based on the details that are listed down here. So if I want it to carry on creating a new resource, if it's going to be busy for 10 minutes, after 10 minutes, it will evaluate to see if it's, again, busy for 10 up to 70% CPU usage, increase count by 1. Now I can change that number to increment by 2, by increment by 5, but depending on what I need, so I can make that happen. Now I can also create a rule for, add in the rule after I create this, which will say decrease count by, and I can define that different rules suggesting, hey, if the CPU usage is less than 20% for 10 minutes, then reduce the count. Now, along with that, we have something here which is quite interesting to look at, which is cool down period. Now, this cooldown period is the time that it waits before it starts re-evaluating some of these resources. Because imagine it's just started a new instance in the back end. Now, after the instance comes to life, before it starts taking any load, it might not be as busy. And if the system re-evaluates it, it might think it's busy, let's start another instance. So it doesn't do that. It waits for 5 minutes, and then it starts re-evaluating everything. And again, in this case, if you have 10 minutes duration, then it will wait for the time to complete 10 minutes and then re-evaluate to see if it needs another instance to add or decrease. Again, that's something that you can add as multiple rules in here to define how it should scale up and scale, in this case, scale out and scale back in. Now, I will leave these settings out for now, and I won't implement them for this part of the demo. However, I just wanted to make sure everyone gets a quick overview of how to create changes to your app service plan, so you can implement scale up, scale down, and how this looks slightly different for what you do in your IaaS solutions in virtual machines. As our app service plan is now created, let's move into the next part of the session, talking about how we can create an app and host it within this app service plan. Let's have a look at that on the portal. Now we're back in the portal, looking at the app service plan that we started off with. Let's start typing in app services as a solution to work with. Now I am going into app services and try and create a new app service. And for this demo, we'll stick onto web app. Now, again, some basic details that we will add onto the basic tab, things like my resource group. And I'll give or choose a name for my app. Now, this becomes very, very crucial, just like we did something similar for my storage accounts, which had a specific endpoint. Now, if you look carefully on the slide, on the portal as well, you can see the end part on app services in Azure is always going to be the same endpoint. It will always end on .azurewebsites.net. So it's very, very important that you come and choose a unique name for your app to ensure that this stands out. So if anyone else has chosen that app name already, you won't be able to bring that app name or choose that app name as part of your setup. However, if you're not happy with this name or the ending on the domain details that you see on the screen, we'll have a conversation about what we can do about that a bit later. For now, let's see if we can find an app name that is unique to us. Let's try and type in Contoso. And I'm assuming that's already taken, because again, that's not the first time Microsoft account would have tried creating a Contoso app. So let's do Contoso AZ104 Demo 1. Now, I'm assuming that is not used before by somebody else, and I'm correct in thinking that's such a long name for my app. Ideally, a better naming convention would go better, but we'll live with that. We'll go with Contoso AZ104 Demo 1, and that's the app name I'm creating, .azurewebsites.net. Now let's carry on building this, and before I do, next part, it says publish. How am I bringing this application to this particular solution? Do I have a code ready? Ideally, if you have a code ready, if you see my next tab already, it looks at deployment. Now for this part of the demo, we are not going to implement any databases for our app, so I'll skip that tab out. But let's go into the deployment tab for a few moments before we go back into the basic tab to complete the settings. In the deployment part, it's giving me options on how am I going to look into deploying this application. Ideally, you'll have your code available to you at some place, particularly in some sort of a repository. Now, if you are looking to bring this app in from a repository, things like your GitHub, then that might be a A good way to synchronize some of that in here. You can plug your resources directly from GitHub here. Choose the details that it will ask you to plug that code directly from GitHub in here, which is much secure and better to push out some of those details in here. However, in my scenario, in this particular part of the demo, I am going to change some of that because I don't necessarily have a code ready for an application. So I am going to choose an option for container. So I am going to use a container image to create an application in this part of the session. Now we'll discuss a little bit later on what is container and how that looks different. But for now, let's choose a container as a solution and move on. And before I go further, let's see what's changed on the top. I don't have the deployment solution there anymore. It's switched to container because now I am bringing in a container. We'll have a look at this tab in just a minute. The other options I am going to choose is deciding what operating system this solution is going to be working on. Now, earlier on, we chose Linux for our app service plan. Now, if I change that to Linux over here, I won't be able to see my app service plan down here. Now, the region that we chose, let's choose the region. Let's go into UK South to start with and start seeing if I get any options. Now, if you pay attention to my app service plan over here, it still suggests that I need to create a new plan, simply because I am now creating an app solution that's using Windows, but my existing plan host is only working with Linux. If I switch that to Linux, now this should give me the option to host that onto the app service plan that we created earlier on. So if I go into that, we should be able to see the app service plan that we have called Contoso Apps that we created earlier on. Now we'll host this into our existing app service plan. Now I can at this stage choose to create a new app service plan. It will simply bring the same menu back that we saw in the previous demo, and we can choose some of the details and create a new plan. But for now, we're happy with the plan that we have running in our environment. Shows me some of the compute that I have, and if I need to change any of that, I can always go back into the app service plan at any stage and make that change and carry on working. Now for now, that's all the settings that we're choosing in the basic tab. Let's start looking at some of the next options, and let's jump onto the container. Now this is an interesting part, because if you're looking at creating a solution from a container environment, typically for containers, you have an image which typically has everything that you need to run within that app or an application within a container or an image available for you to deploy. In this case, we are assuming that we have an image ready, and we are going to bring that image. Typically, you can host this image in multiple repositories if you want. Azure offers Azure Container Registry for us to manage that. We can look at other container registries, things like Docker. So we can go into Docker Hub and have a registry available from there. Now, this image on Docker Hub could be an open image for anyone in the world to pick one and create it, or it could be a private image that you've created for your organization and only you can access it with your user account details. So any of those solutions are catered for in this environment. Now let's assume this was coming from a container registry that we haven't defined here. We can choose if it's public that anyone can see, or is it coming from a private source. And if that's the case, I need to provide my username and password to get onto that. Now it's assuming that I'm bringing this from Docker or as a Docker solution in my environment, that I can do that. However, if I want to use a public image, still I can go and simply type in the image tag or image detail in here and start bringing that image to my solution in here. Now, in my case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a third option that's listed over here, which is a quick starter. This is where Microsoft has predefined images available for you in the marketplace for demos like today. So we can pick one image to start straight away. Now, the image that it's using is called Nginx. Now, Nginx is a quick demo for us to work with today. There are quite a few other images for Nginx available on Docker. If I wanted to do that demo for today, by all means we can, but let's stick to this and let's move on with this. Now, the next tab that I have, well, before I go to the next tab, it may be worthwhile pointing out that this is pulling this information out from Microsoft Container Registry anyway, so that's good to see. However, let's jump onto the next tab. This is my networking tab. Now, if I'm creating this image that's going to be publicly available for everyone to access, I need to switch that on. Again, some parts of the security we mentioned as our networking solutions. we can choose to turn this access off and define how people will gain access to this app as maybe a private access to this application internally to my environment, or maybe I'm leaving this open for the whole world to connect to as the endpoint will become public. Now, once I'm happy with some of those networking options, I can go into looking at monitor and secure. This is where you can start configuring details that you might want to monitor and capture additional data from this application in your environment. So you can enable app insights. I'll leave app insights off for now. This is something that you can look at a little bit more detail in the last module under Azure monitoring, and we can look into that. We can also enable security feature for Microsoft Defender for Cloud that can provide you workload protection, particularly for your apps. So I already have that feature enabled in my environment, so it will look into defending my application using that feature. For now, we are done with choosing or creating this app. Finally, what I want to do is hit create and review, and our app is ready as quick as that. All right, the app is ready to go into. Let's go into the resource to check the app. Now, as we can see, we are currently into the Contoso AZ104 Demo 1 app, and it's ready for us to work with. Now, what I will do is I'll explore a little bit more into the details or the blade on this app to understand a little bit more around my Azure App Services and apps that we're creating within. Currently, we are in the overview tab looking at some details around this, so we can see that it's hosted on the plan that we created earlier on, and that's the endpoint link for it. We'll go into that just in a few moments and have a look at it. It's currently running. It's ready to go. In fact, if anyone in the world was clicking on this, I'm not sure by the time you're watching this video if I still have this app hosted. So if I click on it right now, my app is live. This is a live link available in the world. So anyone in the world right now while I'm doing this demo is trying this is live. However, if you're watching this at a later stage, you might not have this app running. I might have taken it down by then. Now, a couple of things to point out. In fact, let's go through a few things to point out. Now, I'm just scrolling down the blade of my app, web app that we've got created. One thing I wanted to point right down here within the app is if I need to look at scaling this app, I can do that by pointing into some of these options right over here. If I can choose, apologies, let's try that again. So if I choose any of these options over here, however, bear this in mind, and if you look carefully this information here, that it will not change or scale up or scale out for this app. In fact, it's the plan that this app is hosted in is what will change. Something that we looked at in the previous demo in terms of understanding how we can scale in, scale out, scale up, scale down an app service plan. So you can do the same over here. Now, along with that, I also mentioned that if you are not happy with the domain details that you currently have for your app, by all means come to your custom domain tab under your blade in your web apps, and this is where you can start bringing in a custom domain. Now, unlike some of the other settings that we've seen in the course so far, where we didn't have options to purchase our apps or domain names in this case, you can do some of that in here. So you can go into choose this option to say buy an app service domain while you're in the app services itself. So you can choose one if they're available, things like contoso.com, which I'm very sure currently is not available. But if your app has a better name that you're choosing to apply to it, you can create one from in here. Once you have that, you can see that entry added down here, which will create you a record for it. So your app can then be rerouted using the DNS settings that are in here to direct it to your purchased domain. Now, if you already have a domain from before, you can simply go and add a custom domain from in here and bring that custom domain to map against this particular detail that we have, which is our Contoso AZ104 Demo 1 .azurewebsites.com. So I'm hoping you're okay to look at that. So currently this is going, oh sorry, .net, apologies. That's Contoso AZ104 Demo 1.azurewebsites.net is the default setting that we'll probably see at the end of every website, azurewebsites.net. Based on the domain or app name that we create over here. So it will map against that and it will help me redirect traffic onto this. So this is one thing that you can do in your app in terms of the names on the app. Now, apart from looking at the custom domain, now what if I'm creating this app for my clients and I want to make sure that I have users that are logging into this app are actual users and I'm not getting targeted by malicious actors to waste my resources. Remember, this app service plan caters for a certain traffic coming to my site, and I don't want my actual users that should be using the site suffering the denial of service attack kind of issues in this environment. Also, I don't want them to, my app service plan to run out of the compute that I have in the back end or scaling up every time there's a lot of pressure and it's not genuine clients. There's actually some sort of malicious attack by someone out there that might be looking to do that to my site. Now, we have DDoS protection as a separate solution, but in this case, what I can do as a solution, I can think of creating an authentication as part of this app. So whoever lands onto this app must authenticate to go into the rest of my app services, which is a very common trend that you see nowadays, regardless of the app you go into or site that you go into. They ask you to log in. Either you create a new login account or they ask you to log in with your current identities that you already have with other identity providers out there. This is something similar that we can do over here as well. I can see some options to add an identity provider here, and I could go into details of choosing one of these from the list. It could be another Entra instance that you've got running in another environment. You can look at other resources like some of them listed on the screen. Now, if they're not available on the screen, as long as they cater for some of the modern authentication protocols like OpenID Connect, you can still plug them in as part of your setup. As an example, if you say, let's go by picking up Facebook account. Now, all I need to do is go and define some of those details and how this communication works from this app to the Facebook. A user trying to log into this might have an option there to say, hey, I'll use my identity with Facebook and log in. All they will have to do simply is click on the link. The actual authentication is passed on to Facebook. You authenticate yourself with Facebook and you're redirected here. Again, part of your federated services in the backend. It'll authenticate and accept what Facebook tells Entra in your setup to suggest, hey, we are happy this user authenticated to its identity provider, so you can accept this user as an authenticated user. So you can have some of that setup available in this environment as well. Now, let's have a quick look at a couple of the things. If I scroll back up here and look at an option that we saw earlier on in our slides called deployment slots, which we didn't really go into details talking about, let's have a quick conversation about what the deployment slots are and then have a look at them on the portal. Now, as a quick explanation on what deployment slots are, imagine you are working with a site that you want to work or publish on the web. Currently, this site is visible for everyone, and this is what we refer as a site that is in production because everyone can see this. However, if you wanted to make some changes to this site, in the past, you are looking at a server that's hosting your sites. Any updates or changes you make would mean that you're removing the old sites and bringing new ones in. Now, in this scenario, we want to try doing something similar without any downtime, because if I am replacing the current files on the server, it will have a downtime. Even though if it's for a few seconds or minutes, it still generates downtime. So we want to avoid some of that. Now, if I look at the deployment slots to understand this, you can imagine we can create multiple slots in our environment depending on the plans that you're choosing, as explained on the screen. I can provide different developers or different teams within my dev environments and give them different parts of my site, or create different versions of my site. Things like I have multiple promotions coming in and different seasons are coming up. I have different festival occasions coming up, so I can come and plan for holiday seasons, weather seasons, whatever that you may need to plan for. You can create various sites. You might have a normal site, then every time there is an event, you have a promotional site, some sort of celebration details on there, occasional details on there with images, graphics, text, discounts, all sorts of different things that you might want to bring on. And after that period is done, you might want to go back onto the original site that you have. Or you're just genuinely looking at updating the current content on the site very, very regularly. Now, what we can do is we can have multiple slots available in your environment. Now, these slots can have that new site or the updated version of the site available for you to go. What you can do is, as and when you're ready, we will refer to these slots as staging space. When you're ready to switch them around, you can click a button and bring that site from the staging stage or staging area into production. And the site that you have in production doesn't disappear. It actually switches space with your site that is on production right now into the staging space. Now, there are certain settings that won't swap spaces in the back end. For example, if you've purchased custom domain names and if you have allocated particular certificates, there are quite a few other settings that are something that we refer as sticky settings. They won't swap spaces, but there are quite a few other things that will swap along with the site. So it's worthwhile looking into the documentation before you start planning for creating deployment slots and changing things around to understand which settings will and won't move along when you do the switch. However, just to demonstrate as a very quick understanding of this, let's go into the portal and have a look at this. Now I'm back into the portal and I can see I have nothing at the moment in my deployment slot. Let's go into adding a slot. This time what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this deployment slot as a promotion and I'll stop there. Now if I look at the link that is generating for me, currently my app name was called Contoso AZ104 Demo, such a long name for an app. However, what it's doing now is creating me a hyphen promotion and creating the rest of the link for it, which is azurewebsites.net. Now, this tells me that this new site that I'm creating, this new slot that I'm creating, it's actually part of that original site that we have or app that we have working in this environment. So that's what we are going to do. Now, I get an option to clone this if I wanted to. I'm not going to choose that because I want to demonstrate when I do the switch to show you how the new site or new version of the site would look like as it happens in real time. So we'll have a test on that just in a second. Now let's go and click on add and create a new slot, which is completely different to the original slot, and see what happens in here. Right, I've got my deployment slot already configured. Let's go and close some of the other tabs that we've got running on the screen so we have some empty space. Now, as part of that, what I want to do is explain that we've got the app that's in production at the moment. We'll open that link and have a quick look at that in a minute. And then we have the deployment slot that we've created also running. Currently, there's no traffic going to it. However, if I wanted some traffic to go to it and reroute some traffic, I could choose some of these options to suggest, hey, bring 2% traffic to this and leave 98% traffic going to the other site. If I was ever landing on a site and every time I went to it, it looked the same, but suddenly switched to a new site and I came back out and went into it again and looked the same as the old site, I could think I'm landing onto a potential malicious site. So I would avoid some going onto that site. So this is something just for testing purpose. If you want to see once the traffic land how it looks like, if you want to try that out. However, we'll leave that out for now, but we'll test this out to see how the swap will happen and how that would look like. Now, before I go and do this, let's switch back to the overview tab, open the site one more time, and we can remember how the site looks like. Now let's go back into my deployment slots again and open my promotional site. And click on that here. Now let's place them in a manner like this. So we have my actual app running here and my deployment slot that I've got running here. So you can see the difference. The one that's already live in production has got that yellow person on the screen. The one that I'm swapping with doesn't have that person, has slight different graphics and details on the screen, just to kind of see the difference. Now that's my site in production. As you can see the link there. As you can see the link for this has that promotion part added into it. So we don't want this, we want the site to swap spaces and let's see how that happens. Now, while I am in my deployment slot, I can hit the swap button from here. I'm in the overview. I can hit the swap button from here. I can go back into my deployment slot. I can hit the swap button from here. Doesn't matter where I do it from, it'll do the same job. Now, if you have multiple deployment slots and you hit the swap button, just make sure you have the right source and right target chosen, and you can swap the right site around rather than going into the wrong space. However, I only have two, so it's already showing me the two sites I want to swap around and how they'll move between the two. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit start swap and in real time go into the new site and see how quickly does this start changing for me in the new site. So this is my site in production. Let's hit refresh. Currently nothing's happened. I've hit refresh a couple of times. What it would typically do, it would take a couple of seconds. See, some things are changing in the back end. So if I go back and try that again. All right, taking a few more minutes. Like I said, it does take some time for it to happen. What should typically happen, the site in production should be the first to switch a space. So I should see the new site appearing up in here and swapping space with the site that I have in my promotional deployment slot. All right, as you can see, it's loaded. It's taken a few seconds to load. Now, if I go back into the other site, which was my promotional site, still highlighted, if I refresh this, has that changed? Yes, that has changed as well. So they have swapped spaces, as you can see, and this is what I can do with deployment slots. I can create multiple versions of my site and swap them. The site doesn't disappear. It's simply swap spaces, and you can carry on working with now the other site that I had and deploy that. Now, let's stop talking about deployment slots and let's go into one last part for this with my app services. The last part that I want to talk about is backups for my app services. Now, we have a whole module on backup, but it doesn't cover app backups within. So let's talk about app backups as we are right now talking about it. So within my app backup, this is a PaaS solution. So app backups are already enabled for me automatically. I don't need to go and configure anything around them. I don't need to go and make any changes to them either. I can leave it as it is. As I can see currently, it's going to be doing a backup for me every hour. This is the current setting that is configured, automatic backup every hour. And it's going to carry on doing that for me in my environment. Now, it'll create me roughly around 60 copies of these, or actually 60 days worth of copies of these. So if I'm okay with that, I can let it run and I can let it do automatic backups every hour and maintain them for me in my environment. However, if I don't want this and I want to change some of these settings, well, I can make some changes right here and I can suggest, let me configure a custom backup. Now, a few things to bear in mind. With custom backup, things change a little bit. With my automatic backups, I don't have access to where these backups are kept. I don't have access to changing the schedule for the backup. I can't do any changes to the automatic backup. However, they happen automatically and it can cater up to 30 GB worth of data within the app services that I'm creating to be added in the backup. However, when I go into creating custom backup, some of these things will change. Things like the maximum size of the backup that I can have in this space is going to be up to 10 GB. That's a custom backup size that it can cater for. Now, if I look further down, it's actually looking at choosing a storage account. This time, it's not managing the storage of the backups. I am managing that as part of the custom setup. I'll choose a storage account. I'll choose a blob or container where I'll place this backup into. In this case, it's going back into the storage solutions that we created in our storage section. And it's going back into my pictures container and it will create these backups in there. I can change the schedule for this as well and say, hey, let me set up my own schedule for this. And I can go back in and choose to repeat this every 1 day. I can change it to 2 hours if I want. If I don't want this happening every hour, I can choose the time that it runs. I can choose the time zone that it runs in. So I have some of those options here now to change. Now, I could also decide over here to choose my backups that will typically happen, like I said, for up to 60 days. and it's got that time listed over there for me. I can go and change some of that. Now I can set up any number in here if I want to. Now if I want these backups to be much for longer than 60 days, I have an option to simply type in 0. That means it keeps the backup that is done for indefinite time, and it doesn't take it away. Bear in mind that every time you're keeping a backup, is storing that in my storage account, consuming some space in my storage, which comes at a cost. So bear some of that in mind. Now this is, again, nice to see. This is a PaaS solution. It already has a backup solution implemented into it. However, if you want to go and make some changes to it, this is where you will go and make that change. Now this brings us to the end of app services and to the end of the first part of our PaaS compute solutions. I'll see you back in the next session.